The neon sign of the Rusty Nail flickered in the dimming twilight, casting an eerie glow over the deserted street of Millville. Jack wiped down the bar counter for the umpteenth time, his movements mechanical, his eyes unfocused. The clink of glasses and the low hum of the refrigerator were his only companions in the empty establishment. He glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m., 15 more minutes till closing. Jack's hand instinctively reached for the bottle of whiskey beneath the counter, but he stopped himself. Not tonight. He had promised himself again. The door creaked open, and Sheriff Dawson lumbered in, his pot-belly preceding him. "Evening, Jack. The usual." Jack nodded, pouring a generous measure of bourbon into a tumbler. "Quiet night, Sheriff?" Dawson grunted, settling his bulk onto a bar stool. "Too quiet. This town's dying, Jack. Slowly but surely." Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to be reminded of the obvious. Millville had been on its last legs for years, a fact reflected in the dwindling patrons of the Rusty Nail. As the clock struck midnight, Jack ushered out the sheriff and locked up. The walk home was short, but each step felt like a mile. His apartment, a dingy one-bedroom above Mrs. Grayson's flower shop, loomed ahead. Jack paused, his hand on the doorknob, fighting the urge to turn back to the bar and lose himself in a bottle. A muffled crash from the alley behind the building snapped him out of his internal struggle. Probably another stray cat, but something compelled him to investigate. The alley was pitch black, save for a faint, pulsating glow emanating from behind the dumpster. Jack's heart raced as he approached. What he saw made him stumble back in disbelief. A translucent, ovoid object about the size of a football pulsed with an otherworldly blue light. It was an egg. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, reaching out to touch it. The surface was warm and seemed to vibrate under his fingertips. Suddenly, a crack appeared, spreading rapidly across the egg's surface. Jack stumbled back as the egg split open, revealing a small humanoid child. It looked like a normal human baby with 2 arms and 2 legs, but its skin glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light. "Jesus Christ," Jack breathed, his mind reeling. The child let out a soft coo, reaching towards him with tiny, perfectly human hands. Without thinking, Jack scooped up the child, cradling it against his chest. It nuzzled against him, its glowing blue skin casting a soft light on Jack's shirt. "What am I supposed to do with you?" Jack whispered, his mind racing. He couldn't leave it here, and he sure as hell couldn't turn it over to the authorities. The decision was made before he even realized it. Jack hurried up to his apartment, the child hidden under his jacket. Once inside, he placed it gently on his worn-out couch. In the light, he could see it more clearly. It was a perfect human baby in every way, except for the luminescent blue skin. "You need a name," Jack mused, watching the child's curious eyes explore the room. "How about Zoe?" The child, Zoe, cooed in response. Its eyes, a startling shade of blue that seemed to glow from within, fixed on Jack's face. Over the next few weeks, Jack's life transformed radically. Zoe grew at an astonishing rate, resembling a human toddler within a month. Jack found himself thrust into the role of a parent, a responsibility he never thought he'd have. One morning, as Jack prepared breakfast, Zoe toddled into the kitchen. "Daddy, look!" the child exclaimed, holding up their arms. The blue glow of their skin had dimmed significantly, now barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Jack's eyes widened. "Zoe, you're looking more human." Zoe nodded enthusiastically. "I can make it go away completely. Watch." Before Jack's eyes, Zoe's skin shifted to a perfectly normal human tone, the blue glow disappearing entirely. "Holy shit," Jack muttered, then quickly corrected himself. "I mean, that's amazing, kiddo. But listen, you can't let anyone see you glowing, okay? It's our secret." Zoe's face fell. "Why?" Jack knelt down, looking into those eerily intelligent eyes. "Because some people might not understand. They might be scared. And I need to keep you safe. You understand?" Zoe nodded solemnly. "Okay, Daddy. I'll be careful." As the years passed, Jack and Zoe settled into an unusual but loving family dynamic. Jack found strength he never knew he had, fighting his alcoholism for Zoe's sake. There were slip-ups, nights when the craving overwhelmed him, but Zoe's unwavering love always pulled him back from the brink. Zoe's abilities continued to develop. Not only could the child control the glow of their skin, but Jack noticed Zoe had an uncanny ability to influence others' emotions. He started small, calming a crying baby in the supermarket, cheering up a dejected classmate. But as Zoe grew, so did the power of this empathic ability. One evening when Zoe was about 12, Jack returned home to find the apartment in disarray. Zoe sat in the middle of the living room, their skin glowing brightly, surrounded by floating objects. "Zoe!" Jack exclaimed, shocked. "What's going on?" Zoe looked up, tears streaming down their face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't control it. I'm hearing everyone's thoughts, feeling their emotions. It's too much." Jack rushed to Zoe's side, enveloping the child in a tight hug. The floating objects clattered to the floor, and Zoe's skin slowly dimmed. "It's okay, kiddo. We'll figure this out together, I promise." But as Zoe entered adolescence, controlling these growing powers became increasingly difficult. Jack lived in constant fear of discovery, always looking over his shoulder, always ready with an explanation or a quick exit strategy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Jack was at work when he received a frantic call from Zoe's school. "Mr. Thompson, you need to come immediately. There's been an incident." Jack's blood ran cold. He raced to the school, finding chaos upon arrival. Students were running through the halls, some laughing hysterically, others sobbing uncontrollably. Teachers struggled to maintain order, their faces a mix of confusion and panic. In the eye of this emotional storm sat Zoe, curled up in a corner of the classroom, hands pressed tightly against their ears, their skin glowing a brilliant blue. "Zoe!" Jack called out, pushing through the crowd. "Zoe, look at me!" Zoe's tear-streaked face turned towards him. "Dad, make it stop! Please, make it stop!" Jack gathered Zoe into his arms, feeling the waves of emotion radiating from the teenager. He had to get them out of there fast. As they hurried toward the exit, Jack caught snippets of conversation that made his heart race. "Did you see that? The kid was glowing. Someone call the police. It's that weird Thompson kid. I always knew there was something off about them." Jack bundled Zoe into the car, his mind racing. They couldn't stay in Millville any longer. It wasn't safe. As they sped out of town, Jack glanced at Zoe, who had finally calmed down and fallen into an exhausted sleep, their skin now a normal human tone. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, determination setting in. He didn't know where they were going or what they would face, but he knew one thing for certain: he would protect Zoe, no matter the cost. The open road stretched before them, promising both escape and uncertainty. As Millville faded in the rearview mirror, Jack realized that their real journey was just beginning. The sun-bleached sign of Paradise Motel creaked in the hot desert wind, its faded letters a stark contrast to the vibrant blue sky. Jack peered through the grimy window of their room, his eyes scanning the nearly empty parking lot for any signs of trouble. It had been 3 months since they fled Millville, and the constant vigilance was wearing him down. Behind him, Zoe sat cross-legged on the bed, eyes closed in concentration. A faint blue glow pulsed beneath their skin, growing brighter and then fading away in rhythmic cycles. "How's it going, kiddo?" Jack asked, turning away from the window. Zoe's eyes snapped open, the glow immediately disappearing. "I almost had it that time, Dad. I could feel myself getting close to controlling it." Jack forced a smile, trying to hide his growing concern. Zoe's powers were intensifying at an alarming rate. What had once been a subtle empathic ability was now capable of influencing entire crowds, and the glowing, well, that was becoming harder to explain away. "That's great, Zoe, but remember, we need to keep a low profile. No using your abilities in public, okay?" Zoe's face fell, a familiar look of frustration clouding their features. "But Dad, how am I supposed to learn control if I can't practice?" Jack sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "I know it's tough, but we can't risk drawing attention to ourselves. Not after what happened in Millville." The mention of their former home hung heavy in the air. They hadn't discussed that day since fleeing, but its impact was ever present. Zoe stood up abruptly, their voice rising. "It's not fair. I didn't ask for these powers. I didn't ask to be different." As Zoe's emotions flared, The light fixtures in the room began to flicker. Jack felt a wave of anger wash over him, foreign and unsettling. He gritted his teeth, fighting against the influence. "Zoe, calm down. You're projecting again." The teenager's eyes widened in horror, and suddenly the emotional onslaught ceased. Zoe slumped back onto the bed, tears welling up. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to. I feel so alone." Jack's heart ached. He moved to sit beside Zoe, wrapping an arm around their shoulders. "I know, kiddo, I know. We'll figure this out together, I promise." As the days wore on, their funds dwindled. Jack picked up odd jobs where he could, but it was never enough. The temptation to drown his worries in alcohol grew stronger each day, but he resisted. Zoe needed him sober, needed him present. One evening, as they sat in a dingy diner on the outskirts of a small town, Jack overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Did you hear about that incident in Millville?" one trucker said to another. "Whole town went crazy. They're saying it was some kind of mass hysteria." "I heard it was a government experiment gone wrong," the other replied. "My cousin knows a guy who swears he saw a glowing kid at the center of it all." Jack's fork clattered to his plate. Zoe looked up, alarm clear in their eyes. They needed to move. Again. As they hurried back to their motel room, Zoe suddenly stopped, doubling over in pain. "Dad, something's wrong. I can feel everything. Everyone. It's too much." Before Jack could react, a pulse of energy exploded from Zoe. Car alarms blared to life, and shouts of confusion echoed from nearby rooms. In the distance, the wail of police sirens grew louder. "We have to go. Now!" Jack grabbed Zoe's hand, practically dragging them to the car. They drove through the night, putting as much distance between them and the motel as possible. Zoe slept fitfully in the passenger seat, occasionally whimpering in their sleep. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind racing with possibilities, each bleaker than the last. As dawn broke, they found themselves in a bustling city. The anonymity of the crowd offered some comfort, but Jack knew they couldn't stay long. They needed a plan, a permanent solution. While Zoe rested in a cheap hotel room, Jack ventured out to gather supplies. As he walked down a busy street, a flyer caught his eye. "Find peace and purpose at New Dawn Church," it proclaimed, featuring the image of a charismatic-looking man with piercing eyes. Jack crumpled the flyer, tossing it aside. He had no time for false promises and empty hope. But as he turned the corner, he came face to face with the man from the flyer. "Troubled times, my friend?" the man asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm Reverend Elias Cross. Perhaps I can offer some guidance?" Jack mumbled an excuse and hurried away, but the encounter left him unsettled. There was something about the Reverend's eyes, a knowing look that sent a chill down his spine. When he returned to the hotel, he found Zoe engrossed in a news report on the small TV. The reporter was talking about a string of unusual incidents across the country. Outbreaks of unexplained behavior, mass emotional events, and sightings of strange phenomena. And in related news, religious leader Reverend Elias Cross has called for a nationwide crusade against what he terms the rising tide of supernatural evil in our midst. In a fiery sermon, Cross declared. Jack switched off the TV, his mind racing. "Zoe, we need to talk. Things are getting worse, and I think it might be connected to you." Zoe's face paled, their voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he'd been avoiding for years. "I think your abilities are growing, expanding beyond your control. These incidents, they're following the same pattern as what happened in Millville." Tears welled up in Zoe's eyes. "Are you saying I'm hurting people? That I'm evil?" "No," Jack said firmly, pulling Zoe into a tight embrace. "You're not evil. You're special and scared and still learning. But we need to find a way to control this before someone gets hurt." Over the next few weeks, they developed a routine. During the day, they'd find isolated areas where Zoe could practice controlling their abilities. At night, they'd move on to the next town, always staying one step ahead of the growing paranoia sweeping the nation. But as Zoe's powers grew, so did the incidents. News reports became more frequent, more alarming, and always, There was Reverend Cross, his influence spreading like wildfire. One evening, as they passed through a small Midwestern town, they found the streets packed with people. A revival meeting was in full swing, Reverend Cross's voice booming through speakers. The evil walks among us, brothers and sisters. It hides in plain sight, corrupting our children, our neighbors, our very souls. Jack tried to steer Zoe away, but the crowd was too thick. They were pushed forward, closer to the stage where Cross stood, his eyes scanning the crowd with an almost predatory intensity. Suddenly, Cross's gaze locked onto Zoe. A look of recognition flashed across his face, quickly replaced by a triumphant smile. "Behold," he shouted, pointing directly at Zoe, "the source of our torment stands before us." Panic surged through the crowd. Jack felt Zoe's hands slip from his grasp as people pushed and shoved around them. "Zoe!" he yelled, desperately trying to reach them. Zoe's eyes were wide with terror, their skin beginning to glow with an intense blue light. The crowd recoiled, their fear palpable. Jack could feel waves of emotion radiating from Zoe. Fear, anger, confusion, all amplified to an unbearable degree. "Stop!" Zoe screamed, and suddenly everything went still. The entire crowd froze in place, their eyes glazed over. Even Reverend Cross stood motionless on the stage, his mouth open in mid-shout. Jack pushed through the eerily silent crowd, finally reaching Zoe. "We have to go. Now." But as they turned to leave, the stillness broke. The crowd erupted into chaos, people screaming and fighting, their hidden desires and repressed emotions bursting to the surface in a violent frenzy. Jack scooped Zoe into his arms and ran, dodging the mayhem around them. Behind them, the revival tent burst into flames, Reverend Cross's amplified voice cutting through the noise. "The day of reckoning is upon us. The witch child must be stopped." As they sped away in their battered car, Jack glanced at Zoe, huddled in the passenger seat. Their skin still glowed faintly, tears streaming down their face. "I'm sorry, Dad," Zoe whispered. "I couldn't control it. I couldn't stop it." Jack reached out, squeezing Zoe's hand. "It's not your fault, kiddo, but we can't run forever. We need to find a way to end this, once and for all." The battered car sputtered to a halt at the edge of a dense forest, thick plumes of smoke billowing from under the hood. Jack slammed his palm against the steering wheel in frustration. "Damn it!" he growled, glancing in the rearview mirror. No headlights yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before Reverend Cross and his followers caught up. Zoe stirred in the passenger seat, their skin still emitting a faint blue glow. "Dad, what's happening?" Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Car's dead, kiddo. We're going to have to go on foot." They plunged into the forest, the thick canopy above plunging them into near-total darkness. Zoe's glowing skin provided just enough light to navigate by, casting eerie shadows as they stumbled through the underbrush. After what felt like hours, they came upon a small clearing. Jack's legs gave out, and he collapsed against a fallen log, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Zoe knelt beside him, concern etched on their face. "Dad, you need to rest. I can keep watch." Jack shook his head, fighting to keep his eyes open. "No, it's not safe. We need to keep moving." "Safe?" Zoe's voice cracked. "Nothing's safe anymore, Dad. Not while I'm around." The pain in Zoe's voice cut through Jack's exhaustion. He forced himself to sit up, meeting Zoe's gaze. "Don't say that. This isn't your fault." Zoe's skin flared brighter, their emotions radiating outward. Jack felt a wave of guilt and self-loathing wash over him. "But it is," Zoe cried. "Everything that's happened. Millville, that town back there, it's all because of me. Because I'm a monster." "You're not a monster," Jack said firmly, fighting against the influence of Zoe's projected emotions. "You're my kid, and I love you, no matter what." Zoe's glow dimmed slightly, tears streaming down their face. "But how can you say that? After everything I've done, maybe it would be better if I just turned myself in. At least then, you'd be safe." Jack's heart clenched at the thought. Memories flashed through his mind. The day he found Zoe, their first steps, first words, all the moments that had given his life meaning after he'd lost everything else. "No," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "I'm not losing you. We're in this together, remember? A twig snapped in the darkness, and both of them froze. Distant voices echoed through the trees, along with the beam of flashlights sweeping the forest floor. "They're coming," Zoe whispered, fear evident in their voice. Jack stood, ignoring the protest of his aching muscles. "We need to move, now." They ran deeper into the forest, the voices behind them growing louder. Jack's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they'd be caught. Suddenly, Zoe stumbled, crying out in pain. Jack skidded to a halt, rushing back to their side. "What's wrong?" Zoe's eyes were wide with panic, their skin pulsing with an intense blue light. "I can feel them, Dad. All of them. Their anger, their fear. It's too much." Jack could feel it too, a pressure building in the air around them. He knew what was coming. Another uncontrolled burst of Zoe's power. If that happened here, with Reverend Cross and his followers so close. "Zoe, listen to me," Jack said urgently, gripping their shoulders. "You can control this. I know you can." Zoe shook their head, tears streaming down their glowing cheeks. "I can't. I've tried, but I can't stop it." Jack's mind raced, remembering all the times they'd practiced, all the near misses and small victories. "Yes, you can. Remember what we've been working on? Focus on me. Just me." Zoe's eyes locked onto Jack's, their breathing ragged. Jack forced himself to remain calm, to project nothing but love and support. Slowly, agonizingly, the pulsing light began to dim. "That's it," Jack encouraged. "You've got this." The pressure in the air dissipated, and Zoe's skin returned to its normal hue. They let out a shaky breath, a small smile of triumph on their face. The moment was shattered by a booming voice. "There! I see them!" Jack whirled around to see Reverend Cross emerge from the trees, flanked by a group of his followers. The Reverend's eyes gleamed with a manic light as he pointed an accusing finger at Zoe. "Behold the abomination!" Cross shouted. "The source of all our suffering!" The crowd surged forward, brandishing makeshift weapons. Jack stepped in front of Zoe, his fists clenched. "Stay back," he warned. Reverend Cross laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You can't protect it forever. The witch child must be destroyed for the good of all." Jack felt Zoe's hand on his arm. He turned to see a look of determination on their face. "Dad," Zoe said softly, "I know what I have to do." Before Jack could respond, Zoe stepped forward, their skin beginning to glow once more. But this time, it was different. The light was softer, more controlled. "Stop!" Zoe commanded, their voice ringing with an otherworldly authority. To Jack's amazement, the crowd froze in place. Even Reverend Cross stood motionless, his mouth hanging open in mid-shout. Zoe closed their eyes, concentrating. Suddenly, the air was filled with ghostly images, memories, dreams, fears, and desires. Jack watched in awe as each person in the crowd was surrounded by their own personal phantoms. A burly man with a baseball bat wept as he relived the death of his child. A woman with a torch saw herself achieve her secret dream of becoming an artist. Reverend Cross himself was confronted with images of his own hypocrisy and lust for power. "This is who you are," Zoe said, their voice echoing strangely. "All of you, your hopes, your fears, your dreams. You're not so different from me, from each other." The images faded and the crowd began to stir, but the anger and hatred were gone from their eyes, replaced by confusion and, in some cases, shame. Reverend Cross was the first to speak, his voice shaky. What have you done to us?" Zoe stepped forward, their glow now a gentle, comforting light. "I showed you the truth, about yourselves, about me. We're all human, even if some of us are a little different." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jack held his breath, ready to grab Zoe and run if things turned ugly again. But then, something remarkable happened. An old woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quavering. "We were so afraid. We didn't understand." One by one, others in the crowd echoed her sentiments. Even Reverend Cross seemed deflated, the fire gone from his eyes. As the sun began to rise, casting golden light through the trees, Jack marveled at the transformation. The clearing that had been the site of so much fear and hatred was now filled with people talking, sharing their experiences, coming to terms with what they'd seen and felt. Zoe turned to Jack, a tentative smile on their face. "Did I do okay, Dad?" Jack pulled them into a fierce hug, his heart swelling with pride. "You did amazing, kiddo. You saved us all." In the days that followed, word of what had happened in the forest spread. Reporters descended on the town, eager to interview the miracle child who had brought about such a dramatic change. Jack watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as Zoe handled the attention, with grace and wisdom beyond their years. They spoke of understanding, of acceptance, of the power of empathy to bridge even the widest divides. As the media frenzy began to die down, Jack and Zoe found themselves sitting on the porch of their old house in Millville. The town had welcomed them back with open arms, eager to make amends for the past. "So," Jack said, sipping a glass of lemonade, "what's next for us?" Zoe's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I was thinking, maybe we could try to find out where I came from. There must be others like me out there." Jack nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Sounds like an adventure. You up for it?" Zoe grinned, their skin glowing softly in the fading light. "Always, Dad, as long as we're together." As they sat there planning their next move, Jack realized that the fear and uncertainty that had haunted him for so long were gone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them as a family, and that was all that mattered. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Jack raised his glass in a toast. "To the future," he said. Zoe clinked their glass against his. "To the future," they echoed, "and to family." As darkness fell, the soft blue glow of Zoe's skin illuminated their faces, a reminder of how far they'd come and the incredible journey that still lay ahead.